I'm very pleased to be joined right now by someone who can help shed light on an issue that we hear going around. You know, because of the coronavirus pandemic, people, they don't think they can get out to the polls. And they've moved some primary elections, you know, they've postponed some, they've held some. But now we're talking even all the way to November of doing mail-in voting for everybody. That way it'd be so easy, no one's got to go to the polls. I mean, who could fault you? If you want to go vote in person, you're responsible for killing people, they tell us. Well, right now, Hans von Spakovsky is going to explain to us what mail-in voting means for the election. Hans is the manager of the Heritage Foundation's Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. And President Trump appointed Hans to the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity in 2017. And I'm very worried about our election integrity. So, Hans, thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me.
Hans, let me tell you, I'm a pretty lazy millennial, okay? I don't want to have to go out and go to a polling place. It's so easy to just fill in that mail-in ballot. Shouldn't everybody do that? What's the problem?
Well, the problem is that absentee ballots are voted outside the supervision of election officials. And that's why, about 15 years ago, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement actually issued a report on absentee ballots, calling them the tool of choice of vote thieves. It's so easy to steal absentee ballots. It's easy to intimidate voters because there's no election officials around when people come over to your house to try to collect them. There's just so many things wrong with it. Yeah, we need absentee ballots for people who are too ill or physically disabled to get to the polling place. But switching to all mail elections, you are just inviting trouble, and there's many different reasons for that.
Well, you know what the Democrats tell us, because it's usually Democrats who are pushing for these mail-in ballots or same-day registration, right? Or, you know, listen, you fill out your ballot and a Democratic operative will come up and pick it up and he'll be sure to drop it off for you. It'll all be done instead of forcing you to do it. Now, what they tell us is fears of election fraud, they're overblown. This is an imaginary problem. We don't have any voter fraud in the United States. Calm down, conservatives. You just don't want certain people to go out and vote. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and that's just a foolish claim to say that. Look, a couple of years ago, we started a database, election fraud database at the Heritage Foundation where I work. It only goes back about 20 years. These cases are hard to find. Prosecutors don't like to prosecute them. They're hard to detect. But we've got almost 1,300 proven cases. And when I mean proven, I mean people convicted in a court of law.
Wow.
Or a judge ordering a new election. And many of those cases involve absentee ballot fraud. I mean, for anybody who thinks this doesn't happen, I'll give you just a couple of recent examples. Remember, the 2018 election, there was one congressional race in the country that was contested after the 2018 election. It was in North Carolina. It was the 9th congressional district. That election was overturned, and a new election was held. Why? Well, because one of the candidates hired a political consultant, a guy with a notorious reputation in North Carolina, and guess what he was doing? He and his staff were going to people's homes to collect their absentee ballots.
Yep.
And the evidence showed that they were forging signatures, filling out ballots, altering ballots in order to make sure their candidate won. That's the kind of thing that can happen when you allow, for example, vote harvesting, which is, of course, what California allows, which means that anybody can show up at your home to pick up your absentee ballot.
Now, what do you think the likelihood is that we'll actually see something like this in November? Because I've heard even some crazy proposals that say Democrats will not sign on to another funding measure unless we have mandatory mail-in voting everywhere. You can do it in any state. I thought the states run the elections. Do you think this is going to pan out, or is it just a lot of talk?
I think it's a lot of talk, and you're right. It's the states that run elections. And in every single state, you can vote by absentee ballot. There is no reason whatsoever for Congress to get involved in this, except that look at Pelosi's coronavirus bill. It contained all these mandates that basically got rid of security measures that states have in. For example, it said states have to allow vote harvesting in every state, including states that today, fortunately, ban it. And look, November 3rd is still actually quite a ways away. The worst case scenario, the best case scenarios I've seen all indicate this pandemic is going to peak sometime this summer. Does everybody out there really think that all of us are not going to be back at work, back at school,
right,
back out eating at restaurants by November 3rd? We all will be. Why would we not then be back in polling places to vote?
That's right. Well, even if we're back at work and back in school and everything is working fine, the left has often said, never let a crisis go to waste. And so something tells me they're still going to be pushing for this political consequence of it all. Hans, thank you so much for shedding a little bit of light on that. Hans von Spakovsky, you can find him over at the Heritage Foundation, and always so great to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure, thanks for having me.
All right, now let's hope that we can protect our elections, because I told you the pandemic might be winding down. The biological, medical questions might be winding down, but the political fight is only beginning, and the left doesn't intend to let this crisis go to waste. We got to make sure they don't take too much advantage. We've got a whole lot more coming up. I'm Michael Knowles filling in for the Ben Shapiro Show. Do not touch that radio dial.